Crossroads Prime looked like a jewel floating in the endless darkness. The massive trading station hung among the stars, its thousands of lights shining against the blackness of space. Every species in the galaxy came here. Merchants, diplomats, explorers, warriors, creatures with scales, fur, wings, tentacles, crystal bodies, and forms humans had never imagined. For humanity, it was proof of one impossible truth. They were not alone. Commander Jake Morrison stood beside the observation window, watching ships enter and leave the docking bays. 5 years in space had changed him. Earth no longer felt like the center of everything. It was just one small world among millions. But one thing had not changed. Humans were still new, still underestimated, still trying to prove they belonged. Jake adjusted his uniform and turned away from the window. His team waited behind him. Lieutenant Amy Chen carried a translation device and a dozen diplomatic files. She was one of Earth's best language specialists, fluent in 6 alien tongues. Captain Lisa Morgan walked beside her. Former Marine. 3 planetary conflicts. The kind of soldier who stayed calm when everyone else panicked. They had not come to Crossroads Prime looking for trouble. They had come to build a future. Earth needed rare minerals from the Corax Dominion. The Corax controlled some of the richest mining worlds in the sector, and they respected strength above everything. The meeting had to succeed. It had to. The negotiation chamber was enormous. A circular room surrounded by transparent walls overlooking the stars. At the central table sat representatives of the Corax Dominion. The Corax were terrifying. 7 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, golden eyes that missed nothing. They were not just powerful, they were proud. For 3 centuries they had ruled their territory through military might and an unbreakable warrior code. Jake knew exactly what kind of people he was dealing with. Honor mattered. Respect mattered. A mistake could become a disaster. The first 3 hours went better than expected. Trade routes were discussed. Mineral exchanges were planned. Both sides needed what the other offered. Earth had food technology. The Corax had resources. A perfect partnership. Jake actually allowed himself to relax. Almost. During a short break, he stepped away from the table. He needed water. Needed a moment away from politics. He reached the refreshment station and turned, then collided with someone. The impact was harder than expected. Jake stumbled backward. The other person did not move. Slowly, he looked up, and his confidence disappeared. Standing before him was a Corax warrior. Not a normal one, a legendary one. She towered over him. Her scales were darker than the others, almost black, with faint purple patterns running across them. Her armor was covered in symbols. Each mark represented a victory. A battle survived, an enemy defeated. Her golden eyes locked onto him, and Jake felt something he rarely felt. Fear. Not because she looked dangerous. Because she was. Her name was Zarathal. War Chief Zarathal. A living legend. Jake immediately lowered his head. The traditional Corax apology gesture. He spoke their language. Forgive me. The contact was accidental. I meant no insult. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Zarathal stepped closer. Her voice carried across the chamber. You touched me without permission. Every conversation stopped. Every alien turned. Jake's stomach tightened. I apologize. But Zarathal's expression did not change. In Corax tradition, an insult to honor has only one answer. The room went silent. Combat. Jake froze. Amy immediately looked alarmed. Lisa's hand tightened into a fist. Everyone understood what had happened. A challenge. Publicly issued. A formal duel. And worse. The Corax took these things seriously. A refusal would not just embarrass Jake. It would humiliate Earth. The Galactic Council observers stepped forward. Their voice was neutral. The challenge is valid under Crossroads Prime law. Jake looked at them. And my options? Accept. A pause. Refuse. and be marked dishonorable. Another pause. Or leave the station permanently. Jake understood. Every choice was bad, but only one protected humanity's future. He looked back at Zarathal. The warrior waited. Certain, confident, almost bored. Jake took a slow breath. Then he spoke. I accept. He repeated the ancient Korax words that bound both fighters to the duel. The chamber exploded with whispers. Zarathal smiled. A frightening smile. 2 days, human. She leaned closer. Prepare yourself. Then she walked away. Back in their quarters, Lisa immediately pulled up Zarathal's combat history. The results were worse than expected. 43 formal duels. 43 victories. 7 opponents dead. Dozens permanently injured. She had defeated species stronger than humans, faster than humans, larger than humans. Amy stared at the screen. There has to be another way. Nobody answered. Because they all knew. There wasn't. The challenge had been witnessed, accepted, recorded. Humanity's first major diplomatic mission could now depend on one fight. In 48 hours, Jake Morrison would enter an arena against a warrior who had spent her entire life preparing for violence. She had heavier armor, stronger muscles, faster reflexes, years of experience. Everything about the situation said one thing: the human would lose. Jake sat alone afterward. The station lights moved across the wall of his room. He thought about Earth, his family. The billions of people hoping humanity would finally earn a place among the stars. He had come here to create an alliance. Not fight. But sometimes, history did not care about your plans. Sometimes, one moment decided everything. Jake closed his eyes. He was afraid. Anyone who said otherwise was lying. But fear had never stopped humans before. And it would not stop him now. Because this duel was no longer about his life. It was about humanity's first impression of the galaxy. And Jake Morrison intended to make sure they remembered one thing. Humans might be young. Humans might be small. But humans never surrendered. He had 2 days to prepare. 2 days to find a way to survive against an opponent who should be able to destroy him easily. 2 days to figure out how a human could possibly defeat a Kork's war chief in single combat. Jake stood up and looked at his team. He told them to find every recording of Zarathal's previous duels. If he was going to fight her, he needed to understand how she fought. He needed to find a weakness, any weakness that might give him a chance. Lisa and Amy nodded and got to work. They had 48 hours, and they were not going to waste a single minute. Jake spent the first 6 hours watching recordings of Zarathal's previous duels. Lisa had managed to obtain footage of 12 different fights, and Jake watched each one multiple times. He sat in his quarters with the lights dimmed, his eyes fixed on the screen, as the Korax warrior destroyed one opponent after another. Each fight followed a similar pattern. Zarathal would come out aggressively from the opening bell. She used her superior strength and reach to overwhelm her opponents quickly. Most fights lasted less than 5 minutes. The few that went longer ended because her opponent was tough enough to take punishment, not because they had any real chance of winning. Lisa sat beside Jake, taking notes on her tablet. She pointed out that Zarathal always opened with the same combination of strikes. 3 high attacks followed by a sweeping low strike aimed at the legs. It was effective because it forced opponents to defend their head and then suddenly shift to protect their lower body. Most fighters could not adapt quickly enough. They would block the high strikes but get caught by the sweep, ending up on the ground where Zarathal would finish them. Amy came into the room carrying food that none of them felt like eating. She had been researching Korfax culture and law, looking for any loophole that might help. She found nothing useful. The dual laws were ancient and absolute. Once a challenge was accepted, the only way out was through combat. She did discover one important detail, though. The duel would be fought with traditional Korfax staff weapons. Both fighters would receive identical weapons and light armor. No technological enhancements would be allowed. It would be pure skill against skill, strength against strength. Jake continued studying the recordings. He noticed something interesting about Zarathal's fighting style. She never retreated. In 12 fights, she had not taken a single backward step. Her entire approach was based on moving forward, and maintaining constant pressure. It was intimidating and effective, but Jake wondered if it might also be a weakness. A fighter who never retreats is a fighter who has never needed to learn defensive techniques. Zarathal won by being stronger and more aggressive than everyone she faced. But what if she fought someone who did not try to match her strength? What if she faced an opponent who fought in a way she had never seen before? Across the station in the Corfax section of Crossroads Prime, Zarathal was celebrating her upcoming victory. She sat in a large hall surrounded by her fellow warriors. They drank strong liquor and told stories of past battles. Zarathal barely prepared for the duel at all. She spent an hour in the training room, just enough to stay loose and keep her muscles ready. The rest of her time was spent enjoying herself. To her, this duel was nothing more than a formality. Humans were weak creatures. They had only been in space for a few decades. They had no warrior tradition, no history of honorable combat. They built machines to do their fighting for them, because they were too soft to fight themselves. Her second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Cash, asked if she had studied the humans' fighting capabilities. Zarathala laughed at the question. What was there to study? Humans were smaller, weaker, and slower than Korax. Their bones broke easily. Their endurance was poor. They had no natural weapons like claws or sharp teeth. The only reason they had survived on their homeworld was because they used tools and hid from real predators. Now they were in space pretending to be equals with races that had conquered galaxies, while humans were still living in caves. Kresh was not convinced. He had read reports about human military conflicts. Humans had a disturbing tendency to win wars against opponents who should have destroyed them. They did not fight with honor or follow predictable patterns. They used tricks and deception. They adapted quickly to new situations. They were survivors who refused to quit, even when defeat seemed certain. Kresh suggested that perhaps Zarathal should at least watch recordings of human combat techniques, but Zarathal dismissed his concerns. She told him that human wars were fought with guns and bombs, not with personal skill in the arena. When it came to hand-to-hand combat, humans had nothing that could threaten a Corfax warrior. Back in his quarters, Jake had finished watching the fight recordings. He stood up and began practicing movements in the small open space of his room. Lisa and Amy watched as he went through a series of exercises that looked nothing like traditional Corfax combat. Jake was drawing on his training in human martial arts. He had studied judo as a teenager and earned a black belt. In the military, he had trained in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and aikido. These martial arts were different from the straightforward striking style of the Corfax. They focused on using an opponent's strength against them. They emphasized leverage, balance, and timing over raw power. Lisa understood what Jake was thinking. He could not beat Zarathal in a contest of pure strength. That was impossible. But he did not need to be stronger. He needed to be smarter. He needed to fight in a way that the Corks warrior had never encountered before. If he could frustrate her, tire her out, and make her doubt herself, he might have a chance. It was a slim chance, but it was better than nothing. Amy was less optimistic. She pointed out that Zarathal had been training for combat since she was a child. She had decades of experience. Jake was a soldier and a commander, but he was not a professional fighter. His martial arts training had been years ago. How could he possibly hope to match someone who lived and breathed combat every single day? Jake admitted that Amy was right. In a fair fight, he would lose quickly, so he needed to make sure it was not a fair fight. He needed to turn the duel into something Zarathal was not prepared for. The next day, Jake spent every waking hour preparing. He worked out in the station's gym, building his endurance. He practiced movements until they became automatic. He visualized the fight in his mind, imagining different scenarios and how he would respond to them. Lisa helped him by playing the role of Zarathal in practice sessions. She attacked him with the same patterns they had seen in the recordings. Jake practiced defending and countering, looking for openings he could exploit. Word of the upcoming duel had spread throughout Crossroads Prime. Aliens from dozens of species began placing bets on the outcome. The odds were heavily in favor of Zarathal. Most bookmakers were offering 100-1 against Jake. Some species showed sympathy for the human, admiring his courage, even if they doubted his chances. Others openly mocked him, calling him a fool for accepting a challenge he could not possibly win. The Galactic Council representatives prepared their official documentation of the event. This duel would be remembered one way or another, either as another demonstration of Korak's superiority, or as something far more interesting. On the morning of the second day, Jake woke early. He had barely slept, his mind too active with thoughts of the coming fight. He ate a light breakfast and went through his stretching routine. His body felt ready. His mind was focused. He knew he was as prepared as he could be in the limited time available. Lisa and Amy came to his quarters to check on him. They both looked worried, but they tried to hide it. Lisa gave him a final briefing on Zarathal's fighting patterns. Amy reminded him of the cultural significance of what he was about to do. This was not just about winning or losing. This was about showing the galaxy that humans deserved respect. Jake nodded and thanked them both. He put on the light armor that had been provided for the duel. It felt strange, lighter than he expected. He picked up the practice staff and went through a few movements. The weapon was balanced and solid. He could work with it. As he prepared to leave for the arena, Jake thought about something his martial arts instructor had told him years ago. The instructor said that fighting was not about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about understanding yourself and your opponent. It was about seeing opportunities and having the courage to take them. Jake hoped that wisdom would be enough to keep him alive today. The arena was enormous. It could hold 10,000 spectators, and every seat was filled. Aliens from across the galaxy had come to watch the duel between the Corfax war chief and the human commander. The noise was incredible. Thousands of voices speaking in hundreds of different languages created a sound that echoed off the metal walls. Betting terminals were still active, with most wagers going against Jake. The Corfax section of the arena was particularly loud. They chanted Zarathal's name and beat their fists against their chests in a traditional show of support. Jake walked through a tunnel that led from the preparation room to the arena floor. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had learned long ago that fear was natural before combat. The trick was not to let fear control your actions. He stepped out into the light, and the crowd's noise washed over him. He looked up at the thousands of faces watching him. Some looked curious, some looked excited, and many looked like they were already certain of the outcome. Jake walked to the center of the arena where the Duel Master waited. The Duel Master was a member of a neutral species that had no connection to either humans or Korax. He was tall and thin with gray skin and large black eyes. He explained the rules in a voice that was amplified throughout the arena. The duel would be fought with staffs. Both weapons were identical in weight and length. The fighters could adjust their staffs during the fight if they wished, making them shorter for close combat or longer for reach. Light armor was allowed, but nothing that enhanced strength or speed. The fight would continue until one fighter yielded, lost consciousness, or died. Medical teams were standing by, but they would not intervene until the duel was over. Did both fighters understand and accept these terms? Jake said yes. His voice was calm despite the situation. Then Zarathal emerged from the opposite tunnel. The Corfax section of the crowd erupted into cheers. She walked with absolute confidence, her dark scales gleaming under the arena lights. She wore armor that left her arms and legs free to move. Her staff rested easily on her shoulder as if it weighed nothing. She reached the center of the arena and looked down at Jake. She was nearly a foot taller than him, and her golden eyes showed no doubt whatsoever. She told Jake that she would make his death quick out of respect for his courage in accepting the challenge. Jake did not respond. He simply took his position and waited for the duel to begin. The Duel Master raised his hand. The crowd fell silent. 10,000 beings held their breath. Then the hand dropped, and the Duel Master stepped back quickly. The fight had begun. Zarathal moved instantly. She came forward with explosive speed, her staff already swinging in the high-low combination that Jake had studied. The attacks were even faster in person than they had looked in the recordings. Jake blocked the first two high strikes, but felt the impact travel down his arms. Her strength was tremendous. The third high strike came, and Jake deflected it to the side, rather than blocking it directly. Then came the low sweep, aimed at his legs. Jake jumped backward, letting the staff pass beneath him. He had avoided Zarathal's opening combination, something most of her opponents failed to do. The crowd murmured. That was unexpected. Zathal did not pause. She continued forward, launching a series of powerful strikes. Jake focused entirely on defense. He moved constantly, never standing still, never trying to block her strikes head-on. He deflected, dodged, and stepped away. His movements were economical and precise. He was not trying to fight her, not yet. He was studying her rhythm, learning the timing of her attacks, letting his body adapt to her speed. Zarathal pressed her advantage. She moved forward, forcing Jake to retreat around the arena. This was familiar territory for her. Her opponents always retreated. They always gave ground, and eventually, they always made a mistake. She increased the speed of her attacks, confident that the human would soon tire or slip up. But Jake's defense remained solid. He was not panicking or becoming desperate. His movements were controlled and deliberate. He was retreating, yes, but in a way that kept him balanced and ready to react. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. This was not how Zarathal's duels usually went. By now, her opponent should have been on the ground, or seriously hurt. But Jake was still on his feet, still moving, still defending. He had landed a few quick strikes of his own, nothing powerful, just fast jabs that found gaps in Zarathal's offense. They did not hurt her, but they were annoying. More importantly, they were surprising. How was this human finding openings in her attacks? Zarathal felt the first stirring of frustration. She was stronger and faster than Jake. She should be dominating this fight, but somehow she could not land a solid hit. The human was like water flowing around her strikes, never where she expected him to be. She increased her aggression, putting more power into each swing. Jake continued to evade. Once he stepped inside her reach and struck her in the ribs with his staff. The blow landed cleanly, but did not penetrate her armor. Still, it was a point scored. The crowd reacted with surprise. Some aliens actually cheered for Jake. 15 minutes into the duel, something became obvious to the experienced fighters watching. Zarathal was breathing hard. Her species was built for quick, powerful exchanges. They were sprinters, not marathon runners. Jake, on the other hand, was still breathing steadily. Humans were endurance hunters. They evolved to chase prey over long distances, to outlast rather than outrun. Jake's defensive strategy was designed to exploit this difference. He was turning the duel into an endurance contest, and in that kind of fight, he had the advantage. Zarathal realized what was happening. This human had studied her. He knew her strengths, and was deliberately avoiding them. He was using his own advantages she had not even considered. Her pride was wounded. She was supposed to be the superior warrior, but this human was making her look clumsy and predictable. She changed her approach, becoming more cautious. But caution was not part of Korfak's training. Their entire combat philosophy was based on overwhelming force and aggressive tactics. By making her doubt her own style, Jake had already won a significant victory. The duel continued. Jake began to land more strikes. None of them were powerful enough to cause serious damage, but they were precise. He targeted her joints and nerve clusters, places where even light impacts could cause pain and disruption. Zarathal found herself actually having to defend. Now she had to block and parry instead of just attacking. This was unfamiliar ground for her. She had rarely been forced into a defensive position. 20 minutes had passed. Sweat ran down Zarol's scales. Her muscles were starting to fatigue. Jake was tired too, but he was managing it better. He kept his movements efficient, never wasting energy on unnecessary actions. When he attacked, it was with purpose. When he defended, it was with minimal effort. He was fighting smart, using his brain as much as his body. The Korfak section of the crowd was quieter now. Their champion was supposed to have won already. Some of them began to wonder if the impossible might actually happen. The other aliens in the arena were fully engaged. They had expected a quick execution. Instead, they were watching a genuine contest between two very different fighting philosophies. The human was demonstrating that there was more than one way to be a warrior. Zarathal launched another aggressive combination. Jake saw it coming. He had seen it 4 times already during the fight. He knew the pattern now. He waited for the exact right moment when Zarathal committed fully to a downward strike. Jake stepped to the side, letting the staff slam into the arena floor. Then he moved quickly, getting behind Zarathal and sweeping her legs. He used a judo technique, one that required timing rather than strength. Zarathal went down hard, landing on her back with a crash that echoed through the arena. The crowd exploded with noise. The Korak's war chief, the undefeated champion, was on the ground. She had been taken down by a human who was smaller and weaker than her. Jake did not celebrate. He stepped back and returned to his ready position, waiting to see what Zarathal would do next. She rose slowly, her eyes wide with shock. For the first time in 20 years of dueling, She understood what it felt like to be outmatched. The medical teams rushed onto the arena floor as soon as the duel master made his declaration. They attended to both fighters, though Zarathal needed more attention than Jake. She had pushed herself to complete exhaustion. Her muscles were cramping, and she was severely dehydrated. Jake had bruises and some minor cuts, but nothing serious. The medics gave him water and checked his vital signs. He was tired, but in good condition overall. His preparation and strategy had protected him from the worst damage. As the medics worked, Jake looked across the arena floor at Zarathal. She was sitting on a medical platform while 3 medics fussed over her. Even exhausted and defeated, she maintained her dignity. She caught Jake's eye and gave him a small nod. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. She was acknowledging him as an equal. In the Korax culture, that was the highest honor one warrior could give another. The crowd began to disperse. Aliens of all species talked excitedly about what they had witnessed. Many were already sending messages to their home worlds telling them about the duel. The news would spread quickly through the galaxy. Humanity had made a statement today. They were not weak. They were not easy targets. And they were wise enough to seek peace, even when they could win wars. These were qualities that many species valued highly. Jake returned to his quarters with Lisa and Amy. They were both relieved and exhausted. Lisa hugged him tightly, something she rarely did since she was usually very professional. Amy was crying, though she tried to hide it. They had both been terrified that Jake would die in the arena. Seeing him alive and relatively unhurt was overwhelming. Jake assured them he was fine. He was sore and tired, but he would recover. More importantly, he had accomplished what they came here to do. He had earned respect for humanity. Over the next few hours, Jake received dozens of messages. Representatives from various alien species wanted to meet with him. They wanted to discuss trade agreements, military alliances, and cultural exchanges. Species that had previously ignored Earth's diplomatic overtures were now eager to open formal relations. The duel had changed everything. Jake had proven that humans were worth knowing, worth trading with, and worth respecting. One message stood out from the others. It was from Zarathal. She requested a private meeting with Jake. She wanted to speak with him away from the crowds and the politics. Jake was curious. He agreed to meet her in a neutral location on the station. He brought Lisa with him as a precaution, though he doubted Zarathal had any hostile intentions. They met in a quiet observation room that looked out at the stars. Zarathal was there waiting. She looked better than she had in the arena. The medics had treated her injuries, and she had rested. But there was something different about her demeanor. The arrogance and certainty that had defined her before the duel were gone. In their place was something Jake had not expected to see: humility. Zarathal spoke first. She thanked Jake for meeting with her. She told him that she had spent the last several hours thinking about the duel. She had also been studying human military history, something she should have done before the challenge. What she discovered disturbed her. Humans had a pattern of winning conflicts against opponents who should have been able to destroy them. They won through adaptability, creativity, and sheer determination. They refused to quit, even when the situation seemed hopeless. She admitted that she had made the mistake of judging humans by Corfax standards. She assumed that because humans were physically weaker, they were weak in all ways. The duel had proven her wrong. Jake had not tried to be a Korax warrior. He had fought as a human, using human strengths and human tactics. That was a lesson Zarathal said she would not forget. Jake listened carefully. He appreciated her honesty. He told her that he had tremendous respect for Korax warriors. Their strength and courage were legendary throughout the galaxy, but every species had its own strengths. Humans were not strong like the Korax. They were not fast like some other species. But humans were survivors. They adapted to any environment. They learned from every encounter. They turned enemies into friends whenever possible. These were the qualities that made humanity special. Zarathal nodded. She understood now. Then she made a proposal that surprised Jake. She wanted to establish a warrior exchange program between Earth and the Corfax Dominion. Korax warriors would go to Earth to train with human military forces. They would learn human tactics and strategy. In exchange, human soldiers would come to Corfax Prime to train with Corfax warriors. They would learn combat techniques and build their physical capabilities. Both species would benefit from sharing their knowledge and experience. Jake was intrigued by the idea. Such a program would create strong ties between Earth and the Korax Dominion. It would also help both civilizations understand each other better. He told Zarathal that he would present the proposal to his superiors on Earth. He believed they would be very interested. This kind of cultural and military exchange was exactly what Earth needed to establish itself in the galactic community. Zarathal seemed pleased. Then she said something that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. She told him that she had been a warrior for 30 years. She had fought in countless battles and won every duel she ever participated in. But today, Jake had taught her something more valuable than any victory. He showed her that true strength includes knowing when to show mercy. Power without wisdom is just violence. Wisdom without power is just philosophy. But power and wisdom together create something greater than either one alone. Jake felt the weight of her words. He admitted to Zarathal that he had been terrified during the duel. He was not certain his strategy would work. There were moments when he thought he might actually die in that arena. But he had learned something important from his own fear. Courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was taking action despite fear. Anyone could be brave when they felt no danger. Real bravery came from facing danger and choosing to act anyway. This confession seemed to surprise Zarathal. In Corfac culture, warriors were expected to be fearless. Admitting fear was considered shameful. But she realized that Jake's willingness to acknowledge his fear actually required its own kind of courage. He was being honest about his vulnerability. That took strength in a different way than combat did. They talked for another hour about their respective cultures. Zarathal was fascinated by Earth's history. She was particularly interested in how humans had managed to survive and thrive. Despite being relatively weak compared to many predators on their homeworld, Jake explained that humans succeeded by working together. A single human was vulnerable, but humans in groups became extremely dangerous. They developed language tools and complex social structures. They passed knowledge from generation to generation, building on what came before. Zarathal contrasted this with Korak's history. The Koraks evolved as apex predators. They were strong individually and dominated their homeworld easily. When they reached space, they applied the same philosophy. They conquered weaker species and imposed their will through military might. It worked for centuries, but Zarathal was beginning to wonder if it was sustainable in the long term. What happened when they encountered a species they could not simply overpower? The duel with Jake suggested that strength alone might not be enough. As their meeting concluded, both warriors understood that something significant had changed. The duel was not just about Jake and Zarathal. It was about the relationship between their species. Earth and the Korak's dominion could have become enemies. Instead, they were on the path to becoming allies. The warrior exchange program would be the first step. From there, deeper cooperation would follow. Trade, technology sharing, and perhaps eventually true friendship between their peoples. Jake and Zarathal stood and performed the traditional farewell gestures of their respective cultures. Then, Zarathal added something extra. She placed her hand on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of deep respect in Corfac society. She told him that she was honored to have fought him, and even more honored to call him a friend. Jake returned the gesture in his own way, shaking her hand firmly. Two warriors from different worlds had found common ground through combat and wisdom. 3 months had passed since the duel that changed everything. Jake stood in the training facility on Earth, watching 10 Corfax warriors work through exercises with human soldiers. The sight was remarkable. The Koraks towered over their human counterparts, their scales gleaming under the artificial lights, but the size difference did not seem to matter anymore. The two groups were learning from each other, adapting to each other's styles, building something new together. The training program was exceeding all expectations. The Koraks warriors were initially skeptical about what they could learn from humans. They were physically superior in almost every way, but as the weeks went by, they discovered that combat was about more than just physical ability. The human soldiers taught them strategy, logistics, and the importance of adaptability. They showed the Korfax how to analyze situations from multiple angles and develop contingency plans. These were skills the Korfax had neglected because their strength had always been enough. Meanwhile, the 10 human soldiers training on Korfax Prime were undergoing their own transformation. They were learning advanced combat techniques that had been developed over thousands of years. They were training in enhanced gravity that made them stronger and faster. They were studying the Korfax warrior code and gaining insights into honor and discipline. The reports Jake received from Korfax Prime indicated that the humans were impressing their hosts with their determination and ability to learn quickly. Jake had been promoted after returning to Earth. He was now in charge of all extraterrestrial military relations. It was a new position created specifically for him. His responsibilities included managing the Warrior Exchange Program, coordinating with alien military forces, and advising Earth's government on galactic security matters. It was a demanding job, but Jake found it fulfilling. He was helping to shape humanity's role in the galaxy. Zarathal visited Earth for the first time. She came to inspect the training program and meet with Earth's military leadership. Jake gave her a tour of the facility and introduced her to the human soldiers who would be going to Corfax Prime for the next rotation. She was impressed by their attitude and readiness. She told Jake that she was beginning to understand why humans had become the dominant species on their planet. They might not be the strongest or fastest, but they were perhaps the most determined. During her visit, Zarathal also spoke at several military meetings. She shared her experiences from the duel and explained what she had learned. She talked about the dangers of underestimating opponents based on their physical characteristics. She emphasized that every species had its own strengths, and that wisdom came from learning from others rather than dismissing them. Her speeches were well received. Many young soldiers were inspired by her honesty and her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes. The trade agreement between Earth and the Corfax Dominion was now fully operational. Ships moved regularly between their territories, carrying minerals, food, technology, and personnel. The economic benefits were significant for both sides. Earth's industrial capacity was expanding rapidly with access to Corfax resources. The Corfax were enjoying a higher standard of living with Earth's agricultural products and consumer goods. What had started as a simple trade deal had evolved into a comprehensive partnership. Other species took notice of the success. Several warrior cultures approached Earth about establishing similar exchange programs. Earth agreed to limited programs with 3 other species. The goal was to build a network of military relationships that would enhance Earth's security while spreading human tactical knowledge throughout the galaxy. Jake oversaw these new programs personally, ensuring they followed the same principles of mutual respect and learning that defined the Corfax exchange. 1 year after the duel, Crossroads Prime announced a new annual event. It would be called the Morrison-Zarathal Exhibition, a competition where different species would demonstrate their combat arts. But this would not be about proving superiority. The rules emphasized that participants were there to learn from each other and share their cultural traditions. Combat would be controlled and safe. The focus would be on technique, honor, and mutual respect. Jake and Zarathal were both invited to attend the first exhibition as honored guests. They returned to the station where everything had started. The arena looked the same, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of one brutal duel, there would be dozens of demonstrations and friendly competitions. Species that had never interacted before were meeting and exchanging ideas. The event was as much about diplomacy as it was about martial arts. Jake and Zarathal watched from seats of honor as warriors from across the galaxy displayed their skills. During a break in the exhibitions, Jake and Zarathal walked through the station. They talked about how much had changed in just 1 year. Zarathal admitted that the duel had been a turning point in her life. Before that day, she had been certain of her superiority and the superiority of her people. The duel had shattered that certainty. At first, she had been angry and confused, but as time passed, she realized that losing her certainty had actually made her stronger. She was more open now, more willing to learn, more aware of her own limitations. These were qualities that made her a better warrior and a better leader. Jake shared his own reflections. He told Zarathal that he often thought about the moment when he chose to offer a draw instead of finishing the fight. It had seemed like a gamble at the time. He could have won, could have claimed total victory for humanity, but something inside him knew that victory alone would not achieve what Earth needed. Earth did not need to prove it could defeat the Corfax. Earth needed to prove it could work with the Corfax. That required showing mercy and wisdom, not just strength. Zarathal nodded in understanding. She said something that Jake would always remember. She told him that on that day in the arena, he had not just defeated her expectations, he had shown her that true strength included knowing when not to fight. Power without wisdom was just violence. But power combined with wisdom created something far more valuable: peace. The Corfax had been powerful for centuries, but they had not been wise. Jake had shown them what they were missing. They walked to the observation deck where they had first met privately after the duel. They looked out at the stars and the ships coming and going from the station. Jake thought about Earth and how far humanity had come. Just decades ago, humans were confined to one planet. Now they were spread across multiple worlds, building relationships with dozens of alien species, contributing to galactic civilization. The duel had been one moment, but its effects would last for generations. Zarathal spoke about the future. The warrior exchange program was just the beginning. She envisioned joint military operations where Corfax and human forces worked together. She imagined combined fleets protecting trade routes and defending peaceful species from aggression. She saw a galaxy where different species combined their strengths instead of competing to prove superiority. It was an ambitious vision, but it no longer seemed impossible. Jake agreed with her vision. He added his own thoughts. Earth had something valuable to offer the galaxy. Beyond military tactics and strategic thinking, humans had learned through hard experience that cooperation was stronger than domination. They had fought countless wars on their home world before finally learning to work together. That painful history had taught them lessons that could benefit all species. If humanity could share those lessons, the entire galaxy might become more peaceful and prosperous. As the exhibition concluded, Jake and Zarathal returned to the arena for the closing ceremony. They were asked to speak to the assembled crowd. Jake went first. He talked about honor, respect, and the importance of learning from those who are different from you. He thanked all the species who participated in the exhibition and encouraged them to continue building bridges with each other. His words were translated into hundreds of languages and met with enthusiastic applause. Zarathal spoke next. She talked about her duel with Jake and what it had taught her. She admitted her initial arrogance and explained how Jake had humbled her, but she emphasized that being humbled was not the same as being defeated. Being humbled meant learning. It meant growing. It meant becoming better than you were before. She thanked Jake publicly for the gift he had given her, the gift of wisdom to go along with her strength. The crowd cheered for both of them. The exhibition was declared a tremendous success. Plans were already being made for next year's event, which would be even larger. Species from all corners of the galaxy wanted to participate. The Morrison-Zarathal exhibition was becoming a symbol of cooperation and mutual respect in a galaxy that had too often been defined by conflict and domination. Jake and Zarathal said their farewells. Zarathal was returning to Corfax Prime. Jake was heading back to Earth, but they both knew they would see each other again soon. They had meetings scheduled to discuss expanding the warrior exchange program. They were collaborating on a training manual that would combine Corfax and human martial arts. They were friends now, bound together by the shared experience of that duel, and everything that came after it. The next morning, Jake woke to find his message inbox completely full. Requests for meetings, trade proposals, and diplomatic inquiries flooded in from across the galaxy. Species that had never shown interest in Earth before were now eager to establish contact. The duel had done more for human diplomacy in one day than 5 years of formal negotiations had accomplished. Jake's demonstration of skill, wisdom, and mercy had created a reputation for humanity that would shape galactic politics for decades to come. Lisa came to his quarters with a report. She had been analyzing the responses from different species. The patterns were interesting. Warrior cultures like the Corfax respected Jake's combat ability and his honorable conduct. But it was the peaceful species who were most impressed. They saw that humans could fight when necessary, but preferred peace when possible. That combination of capability and restraint was exactly what many peaceful species looked for in potential allies. They wanted friends who could protect them, but would not abuse that power. Amy brought news about the original purpose of their mission. The Corfax Dominion had agreed to the trade agreement. The terms were even better than what Jake had hoped for initially. The Corax were offering favorable prices on the rare minerals Earth needed. They also offered access to several Corfax technologies that would help Earth improve its ships and defensive systems. In exchange, Earth would provide food supplies and share some of its own innovations. The deal was mutually beneficial and set the foundation for a long-term partnership. The Galactic Council issued an official statement about the duel. They acknowledged that Jake had passed what amounted to a test. Many species faced challenges when they first entered the galactic community. How they responded to those challenges determined how others would treat them. Earth had responded with courage, intelligence, and honor. The Council formally welcomed humanity as a full member of the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. 3 days after the duel, Jake met with Zarathal again, to work out the details of the warrior exchange program. They were joined by military officials from both Earth and the Corfax Dominion. The discussions went smoothly. Everyone involved could see the benefits. Corfax warriors would gain new perspectives on strategy and tactics. Human soldiers would receive training that would make them significantly more capable in combat. Both militaries would become stronger through cooperation. They decided to start small. 10 Corfax warriors would go to Earth for a 6-month training rotation. 10 human soldiers would go to Corax Prime for the same period. If the initial exchange was successful, they would expand the program. Eventually, they hoped to have permanent liaison positions where Corfax and human military personnel worked together on a regular basis. This would create lasting bonds between their armed forces and reduce the likelihood of future conflicts. Jake was chosen to oversee the human side of the exchange program. It made sense, since he had earned the respect of the Corfax through the duel. Zarathal would handle the Corfax side. She had the authority and the credibility to make the program work. Neither of them viewed this as a burden. They both believed deeply in what they were building. The exchange program was about more than just military training. It was about creating understanding between two very different cultures. As word of the program spread, other species expressed interest in similar exchanges with Earth. The warrior cultures wanted to test themselves against human tactics. The technological species wanted to share innovations and learn from human engineering approaches. The diplomatic species wanted to establish formal relationships based on the mutual respect Jake had demonstrated. Earth was suddenly in demand across the galaxy. Jake gave several interviews to galactic news services. They all wanted to know the same things. How had he defeated Zarathal? What was his secret? Jake was honest in his answers. He explained that he did not defeat her. They had fought to a draw. More importantly, he emphasized that his success came from understanding both himself and his opponent. He studied her strengths and avoided them. He used his own strengths to create advantages. And when he had the opportunity to win, he chose peace instead. That last decision was the most important one of all. The interviews created even more interest in humanity. Jake's words were translated into hundreds of languages and broadcast across thousands of worlds. Young aliens who dreamed of becoming warriors studied his techniques. Military Mies analyzed the duel and incorporated lessons from it into their training. Philosophers debated the meaning of his choice to offer a draw rather than claiming total victory. Jake had become famous across the galaxy without intending to. But not everyone was happy about Earth's sudden prominence. There were species that viewed humanity with suspicion. They worried that humans would become too powerful too quickly. Some argued that Jake had simply been lucky, and that humans were still fundamentally weak. Others suggested that the duel was somehow fixed, or that Jake had cheated. These voices were in the minority, but they were loud enough to cause concern. Lisa brought these concerns to Jake's attention. She was worried about potential threats. If some species saw humanity as a rising rival, they might try to sabotage Earth's progress. They might challenge more humans to duels, hoping to prove that Jake was an exception rather than the rule. Or they might try economic or political means to limit human influence in the galaxy. Jake took these concerns seriously. He knew that success often created enemies. He discussed the situation with Zarathal. She was not surprised by the negative reactions. She told him that when the Corax first rose to power, they faced similar resistance. Other species always feared newcomers who showed promise. The key was to build strong alliances quickly. If humanity had enough friends in the galactic community, potential enemies would think twice before acting. The warrior exchange program was a good start, but Earth needed to do more. Zarathal suggested that Jake should continue to accept speaking engagements and interviews. He should be the face of humanity to the galaxy. His story resonated with many species. His combination of strength and wisdom, his willingness to fight, and his preference for peace. These qualities made him an ideal ambassador. The more species that saw Jake and heard his message, the harder it would be for anyone to paint humanity as a threat. Jake was uncomfortable with the idea of being a celebrity. He was a soldier and a commander, not a politician or a public speaker. But he understood the strategic value of what Zarathal was suggesting. Right now, humanity's reputation in the galaxy was closely tied to his personal reputation. If he represented Earth well, Earth would benefit. He agreed to continue making public appearances and giving interviews. It was a different kind of duty than combat, but it was duty nonetheless. Over the following weeks, Jake worked tirelessly to promote human interests in the galaxy. He met with leaders from dozens of species. He negotiated preliminary agreements on everything from trade to scientific cooperation. He spoke at universities and military meetings about human history and philosophy. He even participated in a few friendly sparring matches with warriors from other species, always emphasizing technique and mutual learning over victory. Amy kept track of all these activities and their impacts. She created detailed reports that were sent back to Earth. The government was thrilled with the progress. Earth was establishing itself as a major player in galactic affairs, much faster than anyone had predicted. Multiple trade routes were opening up. Technology exchanges were being arranged. Earth was even being considered for important positions in various galactic organizations. All of this stemmed from one duel, and the choices Jake made during and after it. As Jake prepared to return to Earth to set up his side of the Warrior Exchange program, he reflected on everything that had happened. He had come to Crossroads Prime expecting to negotiate a simple trade deal. Instead, he had ended up in a fight for his life that became a turning point for his entire species. He thought about the moment in the arena when he chose to offer mercy instead of claiming victory. That decision had seemed risky at the time. Now he could see it was the right choice. It had opened doors that force alone could never have opened. It had proven that humanity was different from other species, and that difference was a strength rather than a weakness. Zarathal stood up slowly. Her pride was hurt more than her body. She looked at Jake with new eyes. This human was not the easy victory she had expected. He had knocked her down, something that had never happened before in the arena. The crowd's reaction told her everything she needed to know. She had underestimated him badly. Now she needed to adjust her strategy, or face the possibility of defeat. She approached more carefully this time. Her attacks were still powerful, but more controlled. She was thinking now, trying to predict Jake's movements. But thinking was not what Corex warriors trained to do in combat. They trained to react, to trust their instincts and their strength. By making her think, Jake was pulling her out of her comfort zone. Every second she spent analyzing was a second she was not dominating. Jake watched her approach. He could see the change in her body language. She was uncertain now. That uncertainty was his advantage. He kept moving, maintaining distance, forcing her to chase him around the arena. The Corax in the crowd began to shout at their champion, urging her to finish the fight. But Zarathal could not just rush in anymore. She had learned that lesson when she ended up on her back. 25 minutes had passed since the duel began. Zarathal was breathing heavily now. Her species had incredible strength, but that strength came at a cost. Their muscles consumed energy rapidly. Extended combat drained them quickly. Jake's breathing was labored too, but he had trained his endurance for weeks before arriving at the station. He had run long distances, built up his cardiovascular system, prepared his body for exactly this situation. He was tired, but he could continue. He was not sure Zarathal could say the same. He decided to test her. Jake stopped retreating and went on the offensive. His strikes were quick and targeted. He aimed for her leading knee, knowing that her stance was becoming sloppy as fatigue set in. The staff connected solidly. Zarathal grimaced and her leg buckled slightly. Jake followed up with strikes to her arms, targeting the muscles and nerves. Each impact was precise. He was not trying to overpower her. He was systematically breaking down her ability to fight. Zarathal tried to counter. She launched a powerful overhead strike that would have ended the fight if it connected. But Jake saw it coming from the way she shifted her weight. He stepped inside her reach, too close for the staff to hit him effectively. He struck her in the midsection, then swept her legs again. This time, Zarathal managed to roll away before Jake could follow up, but she was slower getting to her feet. Her movements were no longer smooth and confident. The arena was in chaos. Half the crowd was cheering for Jake. The other half was shouting encouragement to Zarathal. The betting terminals had stopped taking wagers because the odds had shifted so dramatically that the bookmakers could not keep up. Some aliens who had bet against Jake were now trying to hedge their bets. Others were just watching in amazement. This was not supposed to be possible. A human was beating a Corfax war chief in single combat. Jake pressed his advantage. He moved in quickly, landing a series of strikes that Zarathal struggled to block. Her defense was breaking down. Her arms were heavy and slow to respond. Jake's martial arts training was showing its true value now. He had learned to fight efficiently, to make every movement count. Zarathal had learned to fight with power and aggression. When power and aggression failed, she had nothing else to fall back on. Zarathal knew she was losing. The realization was bitter and shocking. She had never lost before. She had never even come close to losing. But this human had completely dismantled her fighting style. Every advantage she possessed, her strength, her reach, her speed, had been negated by his strategy and endurance. She felt something she had not felt in many years. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of failure. Fear of dishonor. Fear of proving that everything she believed about Korfak's superiority was wrong. She gathered herself for one final effort. She would put everything into one massive attack. Either it would work, and she would win, or it would fail, and she would fall. There was no middle ground anymore. Zarathal raised her staff high and charged forward with a roar that echoed through the arena. She put all her remaining strength into a devastating combination of strikes. It was impressive to watch. Even tired and hurt, she was still a formidable warrior. But Jake was ready. He had been waiting for this moment. Desperate fighters made mistakes. Zarathal's charge was powerful but predictable. Jake used a technique from Aikido, redirecting her momentum rather than trying to stop it. As she swung her staff with tremendous force, Jake stepped to the side and used his own staff to guide her weapon past him. Zarathal's momentum carried her forward off balance. Jake swept his staff low, taking her legs out from under her. This time when she fell, she did not have the energy to rise quickly. Jake stood over her, his staff ready. He could end it now. One solid strike to her head, and the duel would be over. He would win. Earth would win. Humanity would be proven as a species worthy of respect. All he had to do was finish what he started. But Jake did not strike. Instead, he stepped back. He lowered his staff and looked at Zarathal. She was beaten. Anyone watching could see that she could barely stand. Her chest heaved with exhaustion. Her arms trembled as she tried to raise her weapon. Continuing the fight would accomplish nothing except to humiliate her further. Jake had not come to Crossroads Prime to humiliate anyone. He had come to build relationships and open doors for humanity. The crowd did not understand at first. Jake was winning. Why had he stopped? The Koraks in the audience shouted at him to finish the duel. Some of the other aliens thought maybe he was too tired to continue. But Lisa and Amy, watching from their seats, understood exactly what Jake was doing. He was offering mercy. He was showing that humans could be strong and compassionate at the same time. Jake spoke clearly so everyone in the arena could hear. He said that he had not wanted this duel. He had come to the station to negotiate peace and trade, not to fight. But when challenged, he had accepted because his honor and his people's honor required it. He had proven what he needed to prove. Humans were not weak. Humans could defend themselves, but humans also knew when to stop fighting. He offered Zarathal a draw. They could both walk away with their honor intact. They could both claim victory in their own way. Zarathal looked up at him. She was exhausted and beaten, but her mind was still sharp. She understood what Jake was offering. He could have finished her, but he chose not to. In Korax's culture, showing mercy was sometimes seen as an insult, suggesting the opponent was not worth defeating. But Jake's tone and manner made it clear this was not an insult. This was respect. He recognized her as a worthy opponent and was offering her a way to end the duel without complete defeat. The arena held its breath. Zarathal slowly pushed herself to her feet. Her legs shook with the effort. She looked at Jake for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked everyone, especially her fellow Korks. She raised her staff in the traditional salute of respect between equals. She spoke in a voice that was tired but clear. She said that Jake had fought with honor and wisdom. She accepted his offer of a draw. She acknowledged that he was a warrior worthy of respect. The duel master stepped forward quickly. He declared the duel officially ended in an honorable draw. It was the first time in the history of Crossroads Prime that such a thing had happened. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, some protested, but most simply sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. A human and a Korax had fought to a standstill. More importantly, they had both chosen peace over pride.